It is your Classic Metal Show right here on the ClassicMetalShow.com. That is brand new Aftershock from their Detonate release. That is Forever in Metal, and a guy who sleeps, breathes, and plays metal, our good friend George Mihalovich of Aftershock. Welcome back to the Classic Metal Show there, George.
Neely, how are you? Great to be here. Chris as well.
Hey, man.
Well, George, it's been a while since we had you on the show. Obviously, you've been squirreled away in your Pennsylvania studio there, just trying to figure out what direction and what you were going to do with this Aftershock with the departure of your former singer, Vic. And, boy, you came back strong.
Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, it took a bit of time because, at one point, I was the only one left. Everybody had some different, life throws some curves at you. People had families, other responsibilities. And at a certain point, I just still had the concept of the band and where I wanted to go and the material. And then, fortunately, George Borden came back and said, hey, I really, I believe in what we're doing. I don't think we're done. And so we just slowly started to rebuild from there. And because because he and I both have, full-time day jobs, it took a while in terms of just getting in the studio and pulling everything together. And then, of course, the big factor was finding someone who could step in and perform at the level that Vic had. So it was quite an odyssey to talk to all these singers. I mean, I worked with and talked to singers around the world, and a lot of them were really great. Maybe some of them, we tried to do it, it wouldn't work out. Some of them were excellent, weren't the right fit. Some guys just weren't the right fit at all. And actually, Gord, we worked with him early on, and we thought he was going to be the guy. Some things changed. We sort of had a parting of the ways, and then we came back full circle, and I had another guy or two that I was really heavily considering, and I just thought he was the one. That was the guy that really was bringing to the table what I wanted to hear and doing the material justice. So I contacted him, and we worked everything out, and it's been really positive ever since.
Sure. Now, where did you find him? I mean, is he a local guy, or is he some from another part of the world, or what's the deal?
Well, I guess everybody's local somewhere, right? But he's actually in a place called Oromocto, New Brunswick, Canada, which I believe is a couple miles north of Bangor, Maine, which is, really the upper tip of Maine right next to Canada. Oh. And how we found him, Jim Dofka, who's I'm sure you know, who's a buddy of mine, and I recorded the CD at his studio. He knew I was looking for singers, and we were talking about it, and he was making suggestions, and we were sort of reviewing people that we knew and people that had submitted demos. And he just said, there's this guy, and he's kind of up in Canada in the middle of nowhere, but he's really great. And I think you ought to check him out. And I went and listened to a few things that he had done, and sent him a quick note, and he said, send me some stuff, and it took him a few weeks, and he sent me something back, and I just went, wow, this guy is really something special.
Sure. Now, George, let me go back to something Neely just asked you, and you just said, as far as you thought you were good with Gord, and then it didn't work out, and then time went by, and then it did work out. How difficult is it in that middle point when the guy that you wanted didn't work out, and it's been a while since you've done something? How difficult is it, and what was it that kept you focused and thinking, yep, there's still life in this project, versus what a lot of people would have done at that point and said, you know what, this one's done, maybe it's time to start thinking about a new thing or a new direction, or, giving up on the project?
Well, I guess there's a fine line between perseverance and stupidity. So I'm not sure if I walked that line or not, but I think really, you hit on a couple of good points. For me, this was a new start. This was a new project. I mean, obviously it's the same name, but I think, I had an idea of, Vic and I worked together a certain way, and it was great. And Vic and I are still pals, and there's no problem there. But when he decided to sort of go in a different direction and take a break from music for a while before he rejoined Shock Paris, I was able to reevaluate, and I had material I was working on, and it was going in a certain direction. We had always had, I think, some sort of hard rock elements and some heavier elements, but for whatever reason, just the material that George and I were working on was just moving a little bit more in a, for lack of a better term, I use this very loosely, kind of an American power metal direction.
Right.
So I just was really felt like, hey, I like doing this. It's not easy, but just because the way I was doing things before, the band I had before has changed, I'm not ready to give up on it. I've put a lot of work into this. I believe that it's something that I want to put out there, and I thought some people would enjoy. So I just there were times, believe me, there were times when you're just going, oh my goodness, I can't listen to another guy sing this song. How am I going to figure this out? I just can't pull. I mean, the music was there, the songs were written, but I just can't pull it together and get the right singer to come in and who can just handle the material and just help me get it out.
Sure.
And Gord had always stuck in my mind, and he was a really good guy. But, like I said, we had a few things that just weren't lining up, and it's really hard. Obviously they speak English in Canada. Some of the problems that I had with guys from other countries is just there was a little bit of a language barrier. Some of them had some accents that, they could sing the stuff well, but the accent kind of was prominent. But it's really hard to develop a relationship with somebody that you've never met in person. I always use the analogy that when you're doing an original band, for the most part, it's like you're starting a business and trying to get the best people to work for you for free.
Right. Mm-hmm. No, you're right.
We were able to just work it out, and you develop a relationship over time. You get to know each other, and then he actually did come to Pennsylvania a few years ago and he tracked 2 songs. In fact, Forever in Metal was one of the songs that he tracked here in Pennsylvania.
Okay, excellent. Now, George, let me ask you, because I'm going to do now what I would imagine that any fan of the band of Burning Chrome would do, which is look at Burning Chrome and look at Detonate and compare them. And I think that's logical that's being done. For me personally, doing that, it's almost like Burning Chrome had kind of almost like a 70s rock sort of influence to it, where this one is like full-on Primal Fear, for lack of a better, term. What was it in your mind that changed or developed between, a decade ago when you were writing the stuff that became Burning Chrome and now?
That's a good question, and it's not necessarily easy for me to answer because I'm probably a little bit close to it. So I'll go back to something I said earlier. I think that if you look at Unfinished Business through Detonate, sort of Unfinished Business had some heavier moments, maybe Broken Wings and Beware of the Night, but it had sort of in my mind, again, I'm describing my own music, so I don't know how other people perceive it, but I thought it had sort of a hard rock, maybe an 80s hard rock, not hair metal, but sort of more mainstream metal kind of feel. And I don't deny there's probably some 70s influences in there somewhere, but the majority of, other than the obvious things like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and those kind of bands, a lot of my influences were, sort of squarely in the 80s. So to me, I felt that Burning Chrome still had some of those hard rock elements, like on a track like Riot maybe, but then on Sons of Thunder and maybe The Gathering, they had some heavier elements and more power metal elements and sort of expanding things using some acoustic guitars and some additional layering. And then we started to have some songs that were just a bit more, maybe Living on the Red Line, a bit more aggressive, and I thought sort of moving in a different direction. And, you're listening to different things, you hear other bands, you sort of have a different take on music as you go along. George Borden has some different influences than I did. He had a lot of Slayer and a lot of thrash influences in his playing, so he brought some of that to the table, and sort of the way he interpreted some of my riffs kind of took them in a new direction. And of course, when Nick and Vic were in the band, they brought their influences, and I think they both had a heavy 70s influence. So I hope I'm answering the question, saying that as time moves on, you change. George brought some things to the table, and then when the other guys were sort of maybe not falling by the wayside, but we're sort of slowly withdrawing from the band, just some other things and some other sort of influences that I had been absorbing or had absorbed started to come to the forefront.
Sure, George. Well, George, your singer, boy, he's got a lot of elements to his voice. I pick up a lot of Dio sound in his voice, as well as some Halford, and then on the lower growly end, he has a Dave Mustaine thing going on there. At least that's my first impression when I heard that. It's like he encompasses all of the greatest attributes of all the classic metal singers out there. It's kind of strange, but this guy has all kinds of different elements to his vocal style. Did you pick up on that?
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons why I just couldn't, I couldn't sort of free myself from this guy's influence, because he really, for a singer to be able to work in his basement and track by himself and to provide the kind of performances that he does, it's amazing. Because, working with singers, in the studio, typically you have to give them some guidance, or they might sort of think they're onto something, and you've got to sort of pull them back and say, oh, maybe that's not quite the way. But he just immediately was able to interpret what I was. I'll be very specific. A lot of singers want you to sing the melody to them, even if it's an octave lower, or even if it's really poorly done. They want to hear it sang. I'm able to play, because I'm not much of a singer. If I could sing, I would have probably done it myself a long time ago. But I was able to actually play the vocal melodies on guitar, and by far, he was the only guy who could, I would say, get 98% of the way there just by hearing the vocal melodies on guitar. And if you want to talk about the other aspect of Gord's voice that I really liked is, you really nailed it, Neely. I think the best comment I read on Facebook when we released that Christmas song a few years ago was, sounds like Halford and Dio had a baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he does have, like, I hear a strong Dio influence and a strong Halford influence, and he'll tell you those are two of his favorite singers. I believe he's also a big Jeff Tate fan, a big Klaus Meine fan from the Scorpions. But I think the thing about him is he sort of does what you're supposed to do as a guitarist or a drummer or whatever kind of whatever instrument you play. He's taken all those influences, and he sounds like other people, but he doesn't really sound like anyone in the sense of you go, oh, he's a Halford clone, or he's this or that. A lot of people say, oh, I hear Ripper, I hear Ralph Sheepers. Well, yes, because that comes sort of via Halford. And the other thing I want to sort of give him credit for, and I shouldn't pump him up any more than he already is, but I'll do it. He just had so many aspects to his voice. He could do so many different things. He could really do sort of a high, clean sort of power metal style, and he can really become aggressive when he needs to. And everything he does, it's kind of seamless. He goes from one thing to another very effortlessly.
Sure. Well, George, this is something we talk about on the show quite often, and Chris and I, obviously, we're all friends, but, we talk to other guys who do bands independently, like Aftershock. Obviously you're on Bill Peters' label, but regardless, we all know there's no money in making music these days, unfortunately, and you guys do it. The guys who stick with it and do it because of the passion that they have, or it's an outlet for them, much like I do the Classic Metal Show. We're doing this, we're in our 20th year, and we do it out of passion because there's no money in this for anybody. But regardless of that, putting out a product such as a CD or a recording, having time in a studio, everybody's got to take time away from their day jobs and whatnot. And of course you got product and you got travel and all these other things. You guys are self-financed, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
All right. So is the end result worth it for you? I mean, obviously you guys came with a fantastic end result here in this Detonate, but in the end, what is your motivation aside from being a musician to say, you know what, I'm going to spend that X amount of dollars to do this product?
That's really another good question, and I think I mentioned this in the liner notes. You hit it on the nose. It's about passion. It's just something that I feel compelled to do, and the way I look at it is, if you golf, if you're into muscle cars, there are a lot of hobbies that you have that cost money, and you don't necessarily get that money back. Now, of course, if you have a car, I guess you can sell it if you refurbish it or whatever. But a lot of things that people do, travel, fishing, hunting trips, it all costs money. So the way I look at it is I really feel like, for me, I don't mind having a day job. I don't mind doing the regular kind of 9-to-5 grind. Sometimes I do, but you know what I mean. I'm fine with it. But for me, just to do that, I would go crazy. I just really feel compelled at this point that I write this music, and I would just like to get it out there and have somebody hear it. And, Bill Peters and I talk about this all the time. It's really not necessarily the best decision. You've got to try to control cost and keep things reasonable because, for the most part, you're not going to recoup. I mean, the state of the music industry, well, I don't want to say you're not going to recoup it, but it's very difficult to recoup, and it's even more difficult to make a profit. I think we were talking about why keep doing this in the current musical climate.
Yes.
When it's so difficult, and I think I was just saying that it's really, as you mentioned when you asked the question, it's about passion and really caring about what you're doing and believing in what you're doing. And I just feel compelled to do it. I don't know that I'll be able to do it forever because it's really difficult when you put out a record. And I think the last thing I was saying was that I wanted to sort of check the torrent sites because I'm thinking, how fast is this going to be available for free? And I typed in Aftershock Detonate, and I think it was already posted before the release date.
Yeah, it's because I probably put it up there.
Oh, well, I appreciate that for helping us to get the word out then. But people don't realize...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, people don't realize, I think fans need to understand that this is not free. And it hurts everybody, even bands that are on a label. It tightens the label budgets and just makes things harder and harder. But for bands that are self-financed, for lack of a better term, it's really impactful. If I go and I see that there were 100 downloads on a torrent site, sure, if it wasn't free, most of those people or a lot of those people would have downloaded it, but still, that might have been, half a dozen sales or something, and that adds up over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sucks. It sucks that it's like that, and while we're talking about that real quick, what about the paid streaming sites? What's your impression of that for a band such as Aftershock? I can't imagine that Spotify does you any kind of good at all either, right? Or a service like that?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, look, I don't claim to be an authority on it, and I don't have necessarily the right numbers that I'm going to throw out here. But the example that I always use is Pharrell had that song. There was an article in a major publication, if you guys remember seeing that, where he talked about how he had, like 1.5 million plays, and he got some really, I think it was less than $30,000.
Right.
In terms of royalty. So when you look at somebody at that level and it's got that much interest in what they're doing and the kind of money they're being paid versus independent bands that are trying to get their music out there, I mean, it's minuscule. It doesn't amount to anything.
Right.
I think it's fine if people enjoy streaming services and that's how people want their music delivered, but the model has to be a model that can be fair for everyone. So at the moment, I'm not trying to denigrate Spotify and other streaming services, but at the moment, I don't think it's really a big financial benefit for anybody but people at the top of the industry.
Well, let me ask you, George, because real quick, while you were answering that, I pulled it up, and all three records are on Spotify: Burning Chrome and Unfinished, and Detonate are there. So, what is it that's not? And I'm not slamming Bill either, but what is it? Is it part of the distribution company that lets this stuff be out there? Because Neely and I have talked about this many, many times, and we don't understand why it is that for the most part, I mean, I know you work with Bill, but ultimately between you and Bill, you control the medium that goes out. Why would the whole album be out here versus, I don't know, 4 songs or 3 songs or something? I've never understood why the whole album just blindly gets released to Spotify and to Pandora and Slacker and whatnot.
Yeah, well, again, that's a really good point, and Bill and I just talked about it, and I said, I'm not sure. A lot of times it's there's a few services a lot of people use, CD Baby, and what's the other one, Bandcamp, and they ask you what streaming services, if any, do you want to be a part of, and I talked to Bill about it. I said, I don't know if I want to do this, and we went through the pros and cons, and he said, look, it's going to be available for free download. It's going to be on all these torrent sites. You need to get the word out there about the band. You want people to enjoy the music. We just got to do it. And I think in the end, if it creates higher awareness, maybe some of that will translate into sales for the people that prefer to actually own something, and who knows where it'll go. So I think it's really one of those things where it's a really hard battle to fight. Bands that are far, far bigger than us have given into it. There's a few that haven't, but we just sort of said, at this point, we're trying to use every avenue to get the word out there about the band and about the release. Mm-hmm. So let's give it a try.
Sure.
But it was a tough decision, and I really struggle with it.
Sure, and it's I almost think it's a double-edged sword, and both sides of the sword are a lose, because in one breath, and this is only me speaking, not you, so I'll be clear about that. But in the one breath, the streaming takes away the excitement of something new. It just, okay, I could just pull it up and I can listen to it whenever the fuck I want to. And it takes away that excitement that we had 25 years ago or whatever, when our favorite bands did a new record. And at the same time, there's that thought that even if a record is not very good, and I'm certainly not saying that on this record, but I know in my collection, I know in your collection, we have records by our favorite bands that we think stink. But, we had to buy them to find out. And that was kind of what it was about, was you bought your favorite records and it was either good or bad. Now you don't even have to wonder if this song or that song is indicative of the whole record. Now you can literally go to the whole record and listen to it. And so I would think for fans, as an example of your band, people are going to make all these comparisons in the world. They're going to say, like Neely was saying before, they're going to say, the singer sounds like Megadeth and Ripper and Dio or Halford or whatever. Well, that's going to lead some people to go to Spotify and give it a listen instead of going to Amazon and buying. And that is what I think is the biggest crime to a band like yours that is make or break on actually selling the product. Do you agree or no? Or
100%. But as a musician, I'm sort of stuck, because no matter how I feel about things, the world has changed. I mean, most people, the way they consume music is Spotify. Not all, but a lot of people. There's a lot of old school metal fans who still want the physical products, who want the liner notes, who want the premium listening experience of it being on CD, because we all know nothing sounds better than a CD. Some people would argue vinyl, but vinyl or CD certainly sound better than any other way that you can listen to music. Cheap earbuds, crappy computer speakers. But as a musician, you're forced to sort of make a choice and say, okay, people have devalued music. And even if I fight the good fight, as an independent artist, I'm probably not going to win. And there are certain battles that I will fight, but this was one that I sort of said, well, let's just go with it, because people don't. It's all about attitude, and like anything else in society, people have to make a choice to do the right thing or to make a stand. And unfortunately, people are willing to pay for a high-speed internet connection. People are willing to pay for an expensive smartphone. People are willing to pay for a really nice laptop or desktop computer, but they don't want to pay for the content. They don't want to pay for movies. They don't want to pay for music. And I mean, I see it particularly in the younger generation, not exclusively, but these kids just have no concept. I mean, I've had guitar students. Do you like Nevermore? Do you like Maiden? Oh, yeah, I have a couple songs of theirs. I got them off their website, or they were free downloads. And I said, have you ever bought a CD by a band and listened to the whole thing to see the difference in sound quality and to sort of hear the entire piece of art? And a couple of kids I got through to, I'll never forget, one kid came in and said, wow, I bought, I don't know if it was a Camelot CD or a Nevermore CD, and he goes, it was awesome. He said it sounded great, and there was like a lot of cool songs, and I liked the way it fit together. But to try to convince people to behave that way based on how things are now with the Internet, it's really difficult.
I agree, George. Well, George, what is the plan for Aftershock? I mean, obviously you guys are blue-collar working guys. I mean, you have your students, you have your day job, you have other responsibilities. So I know it's very difficult for guys to chop out a segment of time, be it a few days, a weekend, a couple of weeks, to go out and play live or showcase your music somewhere. So do you have any ideas what you might be doing this year with for the CD release, or what are you doing?
Well, so I had made the decision. There were some local guys that were really good, and I really liked them, and I thought, should I go with somebody local, because it'd be nice to play some shows and to promote the CD a little bit. But in the end, especially after the struggles I had, I made a conscious decision to say, the music lasts forever. I would love to do the shows. but even if it's limited, and I really just want to make sure that I put out something that is the best representation of what I'm trying to achieve musically. So that's why I went with Gord, who's up there in Canada. So I'm not saying shows are out of the question, but logistically it's really difficult. He's close to 2,000 miles away. It's a pretty expensive plane ticket. So we are talking about doing some things, but I don't know if it'll materialize because it just has to make sense. Because, again, I'm willing to sort of spend the money to get the music out there, but do we dig into our pockets to kind of go in the hole to do shows? So that's something we're in the middle of trying to figure out.
Yeah. Well, we understand it's tough, and, you know, it would surprise me if you told me, yeah, we got a two-week deal lined up last week on the show. I think you may know this guy. Do you know Randy Trask? He used to have a band called Wicked Heart years ago. But
the name sounds familiar.
Yeah, you may have met him once or twice, but regardless of that, we had him on the show last week, and a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, there was for a couple of years running, there was a thing, I know it played over there in Pittsburgh, out at the amphitheater out there. It was called Fake Fest. Do you recall that at all?
Yeah, I do. I remember that name.
Okay, back in the early 2000s, some promoter put together a tour of a bunch of tribute bands that, you know, did tributes to the Beatles and Van Halen and Pink Floyd and, you know, things like that. And it was a whole day affair where these bands who paid tribute to famous bands got together and they basically performed the music of the bands that they were paying tribute to. Anyway, our good friend Randy, who was in a Fake Fest band, he was fronting a Guns N' Roses tribute band called Paradise City. And he went out on the road. He was telling us last week that he went out on the road with this Fake Fest tour, and he was playing out in 15,000 seat, sheds. But he came away, the whole band, mind you, 5 members. They had to split $500, and they had to pay their own travel expenses and hotels and things like that.
That's the reality that people. That's the reality of the music industry that people just don't see or don't understand. I have a good friend who is just, I mean, he's a fanatical metalhead, and he really puts his money where his mouth is. He buys everything that he likes, all his favorite bands, anything that he hears that he likes the samples or reads a review about that he's intrigued by, he buys it. And so I really have a lot of respect for him because there's a continuity between, you know, his love of the music and his understanding of supporting the music. But you know, just in our conversations, I'll give him a shout out, Oliver Schmidt from Ollie's Pizza. I just go in there and talking to him, he asked me all these questions. He went, "Wow, I really never had any idea that guys that are in these bands from Germany and Sweden and all these places that I'm buying their CDs, these guys go on, do the record, they might do a small tour, and then they're back to their day jobs."
Yeah.
Actually, one of our favorite bands, Dream Evil. I don't know if you know them. They're from Sweden.
Oh yeah, great band.
Well, we had Nicholas, the lead singer, on the show, and he did the interview with us from his day job at the hardware store.
Yeah, and that's the reality. You look at them. By the way, love that band. I think he's a fantastic vocalist. So I'm a real fan, but that's what people don't understand, that these bands that are really well known in metal and really household names in metal and amongst metal fans are doing it exactly like now. They're doing it at a bigger level, but they're still doing basically what I'm doing. They've got a day job and they do it when they can.
Sure. All right, George. Well, we understand, and believe me, we support you. We like you. I've hailed you as a fantastic guitarist. I mean, I put you akin to people like a John Levin from Dokken, and I know you live in the Pittsburgh area, and I've always thought that you should be part of a bigger, actual touring entity. But obviously, that the choices that you've made with Aftershock and putting out a fantastic, CD with this Detonate and, your previous releases, you're doing what you want to do. And obviously you have a passion for it. So we hail you for, toughing it out after all these years and still putting out phenomenal material, and this Detonate is no exception. So how can people get it?
Well, Aftershock.com. We have a Facebook page, Aftershock Metal. There's a bunch of listings. Auburn Records has it available. So that's sort of mail order. If you live in the Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana area, it's available at the exchange stores. And a lot of distributors overseas. So if you just check our website and our Facebook page and the Auburn Records Facebook page, there's a bunch of places you can get it online, and not as many places as we would like physically, but we're working on that here in the States, particularly kind of the East Coast, and there will be some stores in Europe that'll be carrying it.
Excellent. All right,
and Neely, by the way, I just want to say thank you. We've been friends for a long time. You, Chris, and I have known you guys. I think what you do is fantastic, because people like you who have a passion for this are devoting their time and energy to help guys like me get the word out. So we're all in this together. I think people in the media and the bands doing the music, we're brothers in arms, brothers in metal. And I really appreciate the John Levin compliment, by the way, because I think he's just a fantastic guitarist. I drove 2 hours by myself to see Doc in Cleveland last year just because I wanted to check him out again.
Sure. And he's a good guy on top of that.
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't met him, but he seems like a great guy.
Well, next time they're in the area and I'm around there, I'm going to make sure I drag your ass back there so you can, come back and, meet up with Don and John and, get to know those guys, because they're all very good dudes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, George. Well, George, we appreciate you taking some time and talking to us here on the Classic Metal Show. Our good friend Sammy Lee, who I introduced you to over the phone, his band Red Rain are ready to release their new re-recorded CD soon, and we're going to debut that here on the show as well. And he says hey to you. So he's in our chat room tonight listening to you. But, George, we always let the artist pick a song from the latest release. And what should we play? And tell us a quick story about it.
Okay, let's go with The Hunger.
Okay.
And the story around that one is I had the instrumental, and this was when Gord and I were working together the first round. And I'll never forget this. He was home alone, adult home alone. And he said, "You got anything else for me, man? I'm really digging this, and I've got some time." And I said, "Well, you haven't heard this one." And I kind of had some lyrics and melodies, but I just gave it to him. The next morning, he stayed up half the night. The next morning in my inbox, I had this incredible song that he had put together. And I just thought, when he left the band, I thought, well, I could use my version of it. It's no big deal. But when we talked about coming back, I said, look, I guarantee you, if we do this, we're gonna go with your version, because I don't think I can top it.
Perfect. All right, guys, gals, everybody, go out there and support Aftershock. Go buy their new disc, Detonate. It's a killer. It'll punch you right in the face. So here it is. This is The Hunger, exclusively here
on your Classic Metal Show.